we have amongst us our distinguished panelists. Let me introduce them to you. We have amongst us Ambassador Dr. Malaya Mishra. Dr. Malaya Mishra did his post-graduation in political studies and MPhil in international studies from the prestigious Jawaharlal Nehru University in the 1970s. He did his doctoral degree in October 2020 from Corvinus University, Budapest. Interacting with different political streams and gaining an eclectic and interdisciplinary knowledge formed his early worldview. He joined civil services in 1977. His posting included France, Senegal, Mauritius, USA, Iran, Germany, Seychelles, Trinidad and Tobago, and Hungary as he moved up the diplomatic ladder in different positions. As the head of mission in his last 3 postings, he represented India in its multifaceted dimensions. I welcome Ambassador Dr. Malaya Mishra to this deliberation. We have amongst us Ambassador Anil Trigunayan. As a career diplomat, Ambassador Anil Trigunayan has served in the Indian missions in Cote d'Ivoire, Bangladesh, Mongolia, USA, Russia, Sweden, and Nigeria. He is also India's ambassador to Libya, Jordan, and High Commissioner to Malta. He superannuated in 2016. He is a postgraduate in physics from the Agra Kumaun University and studied Russian history, culture, and language at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. As a visiting fellow, he conducted research work on WTO and regional trading blocks at the Oxford University. Presently, Ambassador Trigunayan is the president of MIICCIA Chamber of Commerce, Industry and Agriculture. Recently, he also joined International Advisory Council of the Confederation of Indian Industries, CII. We have amongst us also Dr. Nandita Barua. Nandita Barua is the Asia Foundation's country representative in India. She joined the Asia Foundation in 2008 as chief of party for the CTIP program in Cambodia. Thereafter, she worked in TAF, Nepal, and is currently posted in India. She has over 25 years of experience working in the development sector with several multilateral and bilateral agencies in South and Southeast Asia, addressing issues related to gender equality and women's empowerment, human trafficking, labor migration, trade and connectivity, water governance, urban governance, and renewable energy. Among her many honors, in 2010, Nandita ji was awarded the Prime Minister's Gold Medal by the Royal Government of Cambodia for her technical support to the Cambodian government for creation of victim protection policies and practices. Nandita holds an MPhil and a MA degree in history and political economy from the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. Last but not the least, we have our own director, Dr. Ranjana Kumari, who is an academician as well as a social activist of innumerable values. Her entire life she has dedicated to the cause of gender equality and justice. She is a renowned name for women reservation, 33% women reservation.
I think Mansi, you can cut this section short.
Yes, ma'am. So with this, we introduced our panelists, and I welcome you all to this deliberation on gender mainstreaming of India's foreign policy. With this, I will request Dr. Ranjana Kumari to throw light on the thematic areas of today.
Thank you, Dr. Mansi Mishra. You have always been a great asset to all the new work and initiatives that we take. And we really appreciate your support and hard work to put this panel together of such distinguished personalities. Besides being, of course, trying to get my friends together, which is really a pleasure. I just want to, from the very beginning, want to just make this appeal to all the people who have joined us and also to the panelists that, this is something which we are opening our door to. In India's foreign policy, how it is, really, what is the gender perspective in India's foreign policy has not been part of our discourse, neither in the women's movement of India or nor in the diplomatic core. And this is something very new. So let's enter this whole discussion with a very open mind. And let's have a very open mind. Please close your mics. Please, all of you have to close your mic, okay? Okay, so I think the feminist foreign policy, as we can see from the presentation,
Ranjana, you have been muted. Ranjana, please unmute. Your mic's got muted.
Unmuted. Okay, sorry. So I think, as I said, that let's enter this whole discussion with very open mind. Me and Nandita have exchanged some views on this whole issue, and my team has been doing research to put a lot of information together. Now, the foreign policy of a country which really took this up as a challenge and also is still trying to work on it is Sweden. That's where this whole idea of feminist foreign policy originated. And of course, now we see some more countries joining in, like Canada, Mexico, and also we do see that there is a lot of very active discussion going on in the foreign policy discourse everywhere, including in the UN and also UN related agencies. So there is a lot of focus on this subject. The feminist foreign policy is an agenda for change to strengthen the rights, representation, and resources of all women and girls. And that's the idea behind it. Now, what does it do really? I mean, like, if you can go through these slides, focuses on women's development as a key aspect of foreign engagement across sectors. So when we are talking about across sectors, climate change, talking about different policy, please hold on, Niharika, don't turn the presentation so fast. Okay, so respond to discrimination and systematic subordination that still characterizes everyday life for countless women and girls all over the world. We know, I don't need to emphasize that as much. What else will it do? Create a stronger and wider integration of gender equality in all aspects of foreign policy, promote peace, security, and development by ensuring women and girls enjoy their fundamental human rights, provide representation and inclusion of women in the higher decision-making policy processes. Now, this is also a very, very huge problematic area, because there are such few women as far as the foreign service and also policy discourse in terms of foreign policy is concerned. Women are pushing for it, and I'm sure we'll get there, but it's taking a lot of time. Now, when we look at some of the case studies, the Swedish government pursues a feminist foreign policy, as I already emphasized. Sweden, established this foreign policy in 2014, after many years of promoting gender equality and human rights nationally and internationally. Sweden's feminist foreign policy is based on the conviction that sustainable peace, security, and development can never be achieved if half of the world's population is excluded. Now, we also believe in that, isn't it? I mean, we all believe that we'll never achieve or get there unless women are included. Though the integration of gender equality and mainstreaming, Sweden has been able to address through this, address the pressing issues and has been very successful, let me tell you. We've had talks with the diplomats in India. We visited their embassy a few times, taking up this issue, trying to understand the whole thing. And also while traveling to Sweden, met the foreign diplomats and ambassadors and ministers in Sweden. So the policy has had a positive impact according to them, has had a positive impact on the ordinance and various strategies that govern development cooperation. So first area is development cooperation. That's where they saw the real positive impact. The policy contributes to stronger gender perspective in humanitarian work. That's the second area where we are looking at the way policy has really helped and in the humanitarian aid that Sweden has. And Sweden is working actively with women's and girls' participation in bilateral, regional, global partnerships. within natural resources programs in agriculture. Look at them. Look at the expanse of their policy areas: agriculture, forestry, rural development, marine, and other aquatic resources, where climate and biodiversity are critical. So climate change and biodiversity issues, they have been very inclusive as far as their perspective is concerned. And the feminist foreign policy and the feminist trade policy, even in the area of trade. So it's not just in the area of development cooperation, humanitarian aid, climate, but also in terms of trade, that they have been able to promote and have been getting the results looking at it. Now, when you look at the Mexico, is also moving towards a progressive feminist foreign policy, with the main focus on promoting human rights, equality, and women's rights. So that's so far has been their focus. And they had a very strong leadership, and they took a very strong stand during the United Nations Climate Change Conference, that is COP25 in Spain. Now, when we look at Canada and their initiatives, they also took an explicit feminist stand on its foreign policy targeting the empowerment of girls and women. The policy commits Canada to become a feminist donor by guaranteeing that 15% of all bilateral international development assistance investments will be targeted for gender equality. Now, do we have something like that? Can we do something? We do extend our foreign aid to many, many countries, but have we really reserved some kind of a quota for that this will be directed towards women's empowerment and equality issues? So that's another thing that Canada is promoting. Is there a possibility that we can see something that we can move in that direction? Okay, when we look at India, women constitute only 9% of India's previous foreign secretaries and 18% of the current leadership in embassies and high commissions. So women are not there actually. Just like in parliament, women are not there, only 14-15%, but current government has moved to 11 women ministers. So there is some kind of, you can see that there is something that I won't call it ornamental. Normally, I would always call it ornamental. But I think 9 very important ministries have been given to women and 11 women are ministers. But in foreign service, we still have a long way to go. Though it is a competitive exam, we know women have to compete, but we do have to create a very strong pipeline so that women can get there and can become active. Now, women are relegated to predetermined roles rather than given the agency and equal rights to select into different. Now, Malay and Anil can contradict me on this, but I think this is something which we feel that's what is happening with women in the foreign service. In light of these challenges, India must pursue reforms not only at the organizational level, but also in policy making to build a more inclusive setup, including by adopting feminist foreign policy framework. Where I would like to leave it, how we will do it, what all areas we are going to start discussing, and what all responses we hope and expect to get. So I don't want to kind of get into a very long thing with you, except for posing some questions here. Why does equal representation matter in India's foreign policy discourse? Or why does India need a feminist foreign policy? So my first question is this, that do we need it? Do you think it's important to start a discussion around this issue? And how will it be if we start thinking about equal representation? What do you want to achieve in India with regard to goals of gender equality? So in health, humanitarian aid, environment and climate change, trade and economy, and women's empowerment, all these issues that I have underlined. And finally, of course, what are the appropriate bodies, corporate, multilateral, UN women, India should link with awareness and strategic planning. So I think I leave it at that because I think I have crossed my time limit for this very introductory presentation. Very, very basic, but I would like you all to respond to it and explore how we can pursue the gender mainstreaming of India's foreign policy. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. With this, I will come to Ambassador Malaya Mishra with our first question regarding what is the gender perspective in India's foreign policy?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Vanansi Mishra. And I would like to also thank Dr. Ranjana Kumari and all the participants of today's webinar, in particular the Center for Social Research. My association with the center and with Dr. Ranjana go back a long way. We passed out of JNU in the same batch, in the same year. And while we trudged in different directions, but I think we have met at several points in our life. And I'm very happy that she remembered me to come and address this very, very informative and educational gathering of inquisitive people about how feminism or a feminist foreign policy or gender mainstream will enter into the discourse of foreign policy. How will all this happen? Well, Dr. Ranjana has laid out a roadmap for the Indian foreign policy establishment to incorporate very few important recommendations, if I may say so. I will just make some opening remarks and then allow the other speakers to come in so that we can have a fuller discussion. When I started my career in the Foreign Service in the beginning, in the 70s, we were led to believe that foreign policy is something very esoteric, is a kind of isolated domain, and that what foreign policy is done in some house somewhere in South Block, and people are engaged in discussing and debating on foreign policy issues which do not really touch the public nerve. So it is not to be discussed with the public. And this is how we were led to believe in the beginning. Over a period of time, the foreign policy establishment has led to very many discoveries, self-discoveries. And one of the self-discoveries was there is something called a public diplomacy. And in public diplomacy, you have to go out to the public and tell them what foreign policy is all about. Now, why did it happen? It happened because the Mandarins in South Block who were conducting foreign policy, they understood that foreign policy, if it is a projection of national interest, it has to have two facets, the external facet and the internal facet. And both these facets have to be integrally and dynamically related. In other words, what a foreign policy expert is doing, is conducting his foreign policy in the external domain, must have an impact in the domestic policies and vice versa, which means what is happening within the country must reflect in the external policies of the country. For a long time, this had been dissociated in our foreign policy discourse. And since the 1980s in particular, and after 1990s, when we went into economic liberalization phase, when we had a holistic interpretation of foreign policy and we brought in economic diplomacy and public diplomacy and various other facets of diplomacy into the jargon of diplomacy, that we kind of made it more pedestrian. We made it more for everybody to understand what foreign policy was. And then you had this lookist policy where we went out to various parts of the world and we interacted dynamically with different parts of the world, and we used our various states, for example, the states who are on our borders, bordering the different regions of the world, we use them as kind of intermediaries to articulate foreign policy. Now, when it comes to gender empowerment, it's a huge subject, And I don't think one webinar is enough to discuss that. We have to, discuss on several webinars and in several forums about this gender empowerment. Ranjana mentioned about, other countries having adopted it formally, starting with Sweden. And the latest was, of course, Mexico in 2020. Adoption of the foreign policy, feminist foreign policy, what we call FFP, by Mexico, would have made Indian foreign policy decision makers kind of sit up and realize that if Mexico can do it, being more or less on the same social and political status and economically also, we are both in the same emerging democratic, category, then why can't we? Now, our problems, as we all know, of how our discrimination starts right from the very birth, when a girl child is born, we all know about that. Our female discrimination starts right from the very birth and perhaps ends at the end of the female's life. So it is an ongoing process. Why has it come? It has come because of our patriarchal structure of our society. It has been inborn into our society that a male child is superior to a female child. So till not so long ago, we had this, female, infanticide. You have, people even determining sex, prenatal sex determination you had. Of course, now it is all deemed illegal, though in some pockets they could still be doing that. So the idea is that we have to now come to a stage where we are conscious of the fact that women should take part in equal measure as men could, and women have equal potential as men can. So here I would quote this Nigerian very famous author and feminist, Chimamanda Adichie, in her essay called "We Should All Be Feminists." She has mentioned that feminism does not really belong to the preserve of only the females. Even men can be feminists. And this is a comment I would like to make, that even I can be a feminist. I don't have to be female to be a feminist. Anybody who is sensitive, who is sensitized about gender issues, and who thinks more about gender empowerment and empowerment of marginalized population, and we naturally consider women as one of the so-called weaker sexes, though I don't believe that. In fact, women are far stronger than men in many respects, though we don't recognize that fact. But nevertheless, it is again a kind of attitudinal problem of ours. It is a kind of a feudal, patriarchal, attitudinal problem of ours in our Indian male-driven society to consider or relegate the woman to other activities. Now consider foreign policy establishment. Ranjana brought out the percentage of women representation in our, in our different categories of women. We have only 3 foreign secretaries so far out of 33 foreign secretaries since India's first foreign secretary was appointed. I must tell you a case of one Miss C.B. Muthamma, who joined the Foreign Service in 1949. She was the first woman to join the Foreign Service, C.B. Muthamma. After a certain period of time, her promotion was blocked. And she ultimately had to go to the Supreme Court to fight her case. And in the Supreme Court ruling, then Justice Krishna Iyer mentioned that unfortunately the Ministry of External Affairs is driven by misogynistic rules. And that does not allow women to hold equal place with the men even in the Foreign Service establishment. And that was happening in the 1970s. Miss Muthamma retired in 1979. But Muthamma's example is a blatant example of discrimination against women in the Foreign Service. You would be surprised to know that till 1973, women Foreign Service officers were not allowed to marry If they joined the service, they had to remain celibates. Well, that changed, of course. There have been some progressive, guidelines and rules have come in, but there is a lot of still a kind of, I would say, a kind of a myopic attitude towards women in the service, and that has led to various symptoms which we see now, that certain areas are represented, certain areas are not represented. Soft security issues are given to women, hard security issues are not given to women diplomats. So all that is going on. So if we have to bring about a kind of a transformation in the entire attitude of the society, which reflects in the foreign service, we have to consider the debate completely afresh and change our mindset, and we have to go about thinking that no, we cannot cut ourselves from the rest of the world where it is going advancing far beyond our thinking, and we have to keep pace with other countries also. Basically, we have to do awareness building, advocacy, agency for women, empowerment for women, and an intersectional approach. Now, I would say there is an intersectionality. All our students who are here would know the intersectionality approach in which all our social studies disciplines are being, taught these days. So if social science disciplines can be taught in the intersectional format, why not policy making should be done in the intersectional format? Why not bring the gender issues on equal footing with the male part of it? Because after all, man-female ratio is 50-50 nearly in the world, including in India, with minor deviations. But we should look at this kind of a intersectional approach. We should look at that, this particular problem is a part of human rights, is a part of, deprivation of fundamental rights of a woman right from childhood till the last part of her life, that she is deprived of certain thing, that they should get a rightful place in the highest decision-making bodies. And that is what the foreign policy establishment should think about and do something about it. And there are very many suggestions. And I will come when we are discussing the matter. Let me stop here and allow other speakers to keep. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for the nice.
Mansi, let us acknowledge the participation of Swedish Embassy. There is a person from Embassy who is also part of this discourse, listening to our conversation. Go ahead, Mansi.
Thank you. Sir, I will come to Ambassador Anil ji. So Ambassador Anil Trigunath, I'll have the question for you is, in what ways gender equality is integrated into foreign policy?
Thank you, Dr. Mishra and Dr. Ranjana Kumari, Ambassador Malaya Mishra, my senior colleague, Dr. Nandita, and Smita from the Ministry of External Affairs, and dear colleagues and friends. This is something that is extremely important. It was mentioned that we are being led by a masochistic world order, frankly, even in a democracy like India, much more so. Now, it was said also that we should become feminist. It's true, we used to be feminist. If you remember, there was a saying in Sanskrit, Ramante tatra devta yatra naryastu pujante. So, but over time, I think we got corrupted, our thinking got corrupted, that the strength that we had, we tried to subjugate it. And that is also reflected in what we are going to discuss today. So, no, I have seen what the note that you circulated and what Dr. Ranjana mentioned, the basic parameters, and already nearly suggested what should be done. And we have already got examples, like you mentioned about Sweden, have been posted there. And so I know how it evolved over time in that place. And some other countries, say Mexico, for example, or Canada. But what is the problem that people face? So let me allow me to say about 2 or 3 things. Like today we are looking at Afghanistan, where one of the major arguments against Taliban is that they will revert back to the medieval ages, where the women's role will be once again relegated to virtual slavery. And that's what the whole debate about. So things have come now to fore. I can tell you about some examples from my time. I remember when I was in Moscow, one very senior officer, I won't name her, she sought her post transfer back to headquarters. And all these three examples that I'll give you will show you the kind of problems that exist in functionality while pursuing this, basically faced by women also. Because she felt that her interlocutors there in Russia were not taking her that seriously. And it is a fact, there is a cultural prejudice. They would be happy to talk to you, just that much. Beyond that, it is all men's work. Same thing happens in the Arab world. We have seen what happens. Unless you are the American ambassador, nobody else posts women ambassadors to Saudi Arabia. At least we have not done so. Another one, 10 years later, when I went to Moscow as a deputy ambassador, one of my young colleagues, she came and virtually was crying. And she said, sir, I want to get married to my batchmate, and it's Haryana girl. And she said, but from my place, these are the Khap Panchayat and all the locals who are refusing to allow us to get married and are being very vindictive. So I spoke to the Director General Police, Haryana, and I told him, I said, what is this going on? He said, oh, don't worry, we'll try to provide her the full protection. Now I'm talking about the two civil servants in the topmost services facing that kind of a problem. But he told me, he said, but that's a reality one has to contend with. So that's another thing. And on the other side, again, when I was in Sweden, we had invited Haryana's Panchayat women delegation. And I arranged an interaction with the Riksdag, where women parliamentary group came to meet them. And if you know that there was the law on violence against women in Sweden was brought about in 1998. So these women in their simplicity asked them various questions, and they were surprised to say that even though Sweden today leads the world in gender equality, or effort at least to equate the gender opportunity, that in many ways, those women feel from India that they were far more empowered. So at the grassroots level, they feel they're far more empowered in that sense of the term. Just now, Ambassador Mishra spoke about Ms. Muthamma's case, which is truly a classic case, and opened the doors. And we know that we have 3 foreign secretaries only so far. I hope among the new crop of officers, we'll have many more there. But if you come to think of it, immediately after independence, we had Vijayalakshmi Pandit, who was our ambassador to US, then Russia, and also was the president of the UN General Assembly. You can say that she was the sister of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, so that could have been the case, but she acquitted herself very creditably even that time. We had seen Indira Gandhi, Golda Meir, Srimao Bandaranaike, all those leaders who became this. My question essentially comes to, and we also, of course, one of the finest foreign ministers we have ever had was in Sushma Swaraj. And only very recently, Prime Minister Modi appointed one Minister of State, Ms. Lekhi, in the Foreign Ministry. And for the first time, Foreign Ministry has 4 ministers. Earlier, we had maximum 3. And one of them is women. I also recall a time when out of the 4 secretaries on the first floor in South Block, there were 3 secretaries were women. So that was also a time. So in the Foreign Service, there have been no doubt a disproportionate representation of male diplomats compared to the women diplomats. But this is a problem and a situation which needs to be resolved. And all these issues that have been mentioned, can you imagine that for the first time, we have one lady Air Force officer, Wing Commander Anjali Singh, who has just been posted to Moscow as the first deputy air attaché. First time a woman defense attaché has been set. So it has been mentioned that the foreign policy has been seen in the perspective from the security cover or security lens as of a top secret kind of things. And that's where people thought that the women are not to be included in that exclusive domain, and which has been talked about earlier. So, and secondly, the kind of problems one faces. I mean, you will find very few women being posted to Africa. So they think that these women cannot be posted, but some of them have been have acquitted themselves very creditably, whether it was evacuations from Libya or Lebanon or some other places. I have seen it myself. So women have proved themselves. They are not only looking for soft postings in Europe or elsewhere where there's nothing much to do, frankly, but this is precisely what is the problem in the system. So there are problems in geography, certain geographies of the representation of treating women, even if you are a foreigner or a diplomat, with a certain circumspect. So that's something that one has to be careful about it. Another thing I would like to say is, we always say that foreign policy is a reflection of countries' domestic policy. Now, if what is happening in India, as a diplomat, just precisely what you are going to represent. So apart from the representation of women physically in the Indian foreign policy architecture, what is also more important that we put our own house in order in the first place. Because see, when you are projecting yourselves, that is something that is extremely important. And you asked me exactly how we can work on. Of course, there are several areas in which we can work towards a gender-centric policy. That is more important from our perspective, from India's foreign policy perspective, not to have only the women diplomats, more diplomats, but also apart from including them in all possible positions that have been already mentioned from the highest to the lowest. What is more important is something that is very good in our case is that we are one of the biggest developmental assistance provider in the world. Let's say about 160 countries. If Sweden with the SIDA can do that, now we should be able to use that and make some kind of a parameters whereby certain women empowerment in those countries wherever the projects are being conceived takes place. So that is one area in which we can use capacity building or development partnership, in which it is extremely important. We also know that it is possible that we are always just prioritizing some human security, gender issues and all that. So it is, if India gains in that, so at least in the Human Rights Council in different places, we will be able to project ourselves far more strongly. And that is very, very important in that sense. Another thing I would say is that, in very often we forget the role played by the spouses of the diplomats. That is something very important. I mean, your success of any diplomat also depends on the successful implementation of things by the wife, because she also carries, without assuming any official role, she continues to do much more for the overall maintaining good relations with the country, creating soft power projections and all kinds of things, from social to cultural to educational and other fields. So they need to be recognized as well, in my view. So that is extremely important. We are good now because we are now have been also elected in the UN Security Council this time. And there we have ourselves offered to carry on. We are also in the Social Commission of the Women. So these are some institutional areas where it is possible that we need to do something. We need to institutionalize the empowerment of women as a matter of policy. And even if I'm not a great one for reservations per se, but in this regard, if it is possible, I would greatly support it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your informative answers. So I will come to Nandita. Nandita ji, I would like to know from you why India should adopt feminist foreign policy framework.
Thank you, Mansi, and thank you, Ranjana, for having me here today. Just want to make one point before I start, that I actually started my development sector career with Ranjana in CSR, where we used to have an office in Kishangarh village, which was demolished and I'll not go into the detail, with all our laptops lying, computers those days, desktops lying all around us. But that was an experience of how governance works against those who are being governed. Long story, old history. Coming to today's point, it was a pleasure hearing Ambassador Malaya and Ambassador Diplomats. I think, let me just put a couple of things in perspective here. I think we're looking at two issues. We're looking at foreign service as the structure for delivering diplomacy, right? Whether it's Indian foreign service or other countries' foreign service. And there are some structural challenges that both the previous speakers talked about in this in the system, in this governance system, which delivers our foreign service. And that is also very clearly driven by the fact of patriarchal norms or inequities at home, which either allows or disallows equal representation and participation of both the genders in these governance systems and structures. So yeah, entry of diplomats, ability of women to perform in the foreign service, opportunities, those are definitely critical points to consider when we are talking about an issue like feminist foreign policy or gendered foreign policy, because I think having those faces and voices about whom we are pushing the agenda is important. However, having said that, I think when we are talking about feminist foreign policy, and I think this is something which Ambassador Malaya, you said, you don't have to be a woman to be a feminist. So I think that it's important that we don't necessarily need to wait for those structures to change before India or any country can really talk about having a feminist foreign policy or a gendered foreign policy. Why is it important for a country like India? Let's look at where India is today. And as Ambassador Ranjana said, we really are a major South donor today. We play a very big role in soft diplomacy to development assistance. We play a very big role today in globally in really looking at mitigating or addressing conflicts, both in the immediate neighborhood, but also in other places. India has a very big role in the peacekeeping forces. And incidentally, you know, it's taken 2 decades and 80 countries to have adopted an action plan where after 20 years, the percentage of women in allied forces doubled to 12%. It's a long battle, it's a small number, but it's a win. So when we then say that India has been, is becoming a much more critical global player today, it obviously then necessitates the fact that we look at where do we stand as an emerging global power today on issues of equity and rights. And no issue of equity and right can be really addressed unless we address gender. So foreign policy becomes an important tool, and as was mentioned, it's a reflection of how India thinks internally is what is reflected through our foreign policy about what we think externally, you know. And with the progresses and changes that we are making internally, incremental but definite progresses, our external engagement also has to reflect those thinking. Let me just look at 2 things, and I just want to, you know, I don't want to take too much time because I think I'd like to have a discussion. Let's look at COVID. You know, we're all going through it. We went through it. It's going to continue for some time, and India came out in a big way, at least right after the first wave, as a major partner and a supporter of the neighborhood, where we provided medicines, where we provided vaccinations. Albeit we did receive a backlash later on, but it was a good thing that we did provide our neighbors with what they needed at that time. And that's a foreign policy outreach. That's an external outreach where we are trying to put in our soft diplomacy, and we are giving the message that we are in this together with all of you, and we are here to help you. And that's probably the, you know, a major issue of South-South cooperation as we see it today. The question that I asked myself was that while we were providing this assistance, while we were providing these vaccinations to countries, and all of the countries in the neighborhood, immediate or extended, are not necessarily, you know, engendered to that point. They are also suffering, or they are also living in the same framework of patriarchy or masculinity. There probably are very few countries, or probably almost limited, where you could say that gender equality has reached a stage where it can be truly equitable. So to these countries where we are providing our support, our medicines, our vaccinations, did India for a minute think back and say, oh, wait a minute, I'm giving you 500,000 vials of vaccine, but you need to ensure that 50% of this needs to go to women. You know, a strategic thing which can be easily done doesn't require women to be sitting, but requires a perspective and a thinking that could come from anybody. To say that any development assistance aid in disaster, and India provides a lot of that, should actually have a specific percentage that we equitably move to women, because we know it will not go to women otherwise. Because most countries globally suffer from the same bottlenecks of gender inequality, the same bottlenecks of patriarchy and masculinity that we talked about just now. It's not us in isolation. But we could set a precedent, or we could set and make a statement by saying, when we engage globally, we will try to do the same things that we are trying to change at home, and we will have those reflected in our interactions with third countries. When we are part of the peace process, and we have been a part of the peace processes in all our neighboring countries at different points, and in one particular neighboring country where I did serve, I think, it was interesting for me that India had a major role in that entire movement and revolution from monarchy to democracy. And surprisingly, during the revolution that was happening, during the people's movement that was happening in the country, many women were in the forefront of that movement. They picked up arms, they fought for democracy, they fought for equality. But when the peace process started, none of those women actually, or very few women, found a place in the table in those negotiations. Now, clearly we can say, well, that's that country's own first internal issue, but I don't think that's a valid explanation, because I feel that if you've been part of the negotiation, I think it gives us enough moral right to say that, look, let's do this equitably, because you've had women being a part of the revolution, so they should be a part of the peace process and discussions as well. It's a perspective that we could bring in. And I think India is becoming definitely a major voice today in the Indo-Pacific. We are becoming a major trade partner. How often do we sit back during a trade negotiation, whether it's during a WTO session or whether it's during a licensing thing, and think for a minute and say, wait a minute, is the decision I'm going to take impact women entrepreneurs differently from men entrepreneurs across the border? Is it going to impact women exporters or the kind of goods they export and import differently? So a gender lens in foreign policy actually cuts across everything that a country engages in with another country. Even if it is done under the Ministry of Commerce, it doesn't have to be necessarily done under a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, though foreign policy is largely dependent, and I buy that. But engagements happen at different levels. So engagement in trade, engagement in disaster risk reduction, engagement in climate, especially Solar Alliance, which we have really put to the fore. And India is today a major voice and a major player in renewable energy. The question is, how often do we sit and say, all the policies that different countries are having on renewable energy should have a very strong gender focus? So when can India become, and how can India become the voice for having an equal space and equal access and agency for women across different sectors is what is going to be critical. I think today we are at a position where India is really, we have a seat at the UN Security Council today, though it's a non-permanent seat. It's really our time and our space to shine and talk about the needs that are essential to peace and security, to peace and conflict. We have spoken up on UNSC debates in the past on sexual violence in conflicts. India has actually focused on the need to institutionalize the involvement of women in conflict prevention and resolution. We always know that when there is a conflict, women end up being used not just as the object of the conflict, but their bodies get played out as the main battleground for conflict. And I think it becomes important, whether we are looking at what's happening in Myanmar next door or in Afghanistan, what is the foreign policy voice that India speaks on, which gives the world a view into our own thinking about where gender equality is, where people like Ranjana, where for the last almost 30, 40 years, and many more have fought about these rights internally. And we have made a dent. How do we extend that externally to other countries? That thinking, I think injecting, in my experience in my 25 years of development assistance, I think injecting the discourse with the right perspective is the critical first place. Others will follow. Today, Sweden has injected the discourse on gender and feminist foreign policy. We're picking it up so far away, and we probably, I'm not saying that we are right and ready on it, but we are picking it up. And this discussion that we are having is actually going to further inject that discourse. And the 100 people who are here today, hopefully, will go back and think about how in your own different spaces can you engender what you're doing. And truly engender in small bits and pieces. It's not something which happens overnight. I think that I would like to end by just saying that the objective for us really is to look at the whole issue of diplomacy. And I think we recognize that today is not something as just about securitized national security and border. It's much more. It goes beyond that. It's about sustainable growth. It's about economic equality and opportunities. So if diplomacy is all of that, then sustainable growth, economic security, livelihood cannot be just the domain of a particular gender. It has to be a part of both the genders together. So that's where I think we can play a role. And I think we are very well poised right now. And right now is the time to grab it and make use of the positions and the chairs that India has globally in different spaces to talk about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadita. This discussion has really become very engaging. With that, I will invite both our ambassadors to throw light on what are the challenges in advancing gender equality in our foreign policy.
Should I?
Yes, Malaya, you can start.
Well, as the speakers have already mentioned, there are several challenges. I think first challenges are the systemic challenges, what the system throws out as challenges, which hampers gender sensitivity, I would say, in the higher echelons of bureaucracy, including diplomacy. The other challenges are institutional challenges, where institutions kind of become hindrance towards bringing about, even if an individual officer would like to bring about something, he is hampered by institutional factors. And I would say, above all, an attitudinal challenge where you have to, battle with entrenched attitudes of patriarchy, of, sexual discrimination, of, all the feudal practices which have gone on in the Indian society for long. You see, what we are trying to do now is juxtapose a kind of a societal behavior with something modernizing tendencies, which we want to export out to the outside world as we have brought so much. And we want to find a place in the, let's say, in the UN system as one of the big powers. But our room, our own house is not in order. Frankly, our house has to be set in order. I think Nandita made a very nice point that we have to first clean our own house and make it all inclusive, that whatever we are talking about, and it is not the domain of foreign ministry alone. I think foreign ministry needs to do extensive coordination with all other line ministries of the government of India. For example, women and child development. It's a very important nodal ministry for the foreign ministry. Why should we not engage? And it happens oftentimes when we see that foreign ministry has taken a decision without consulting other line ministries sometimes, and they feel aggrieved. Sometimes it happens. Trade, for example, we have to go to the trade and industry ministry, the finance ministry. We have to keep in consultation. Foreign ministry, I would say, as a foreign service officer, is not the exclusive preserve of the foreign ministry only, because there are so many intermeshing factors at play that the government of India is being projected outside. And the government of India is made out of so many other ministries also. So when you have policies, all these policies have kind of interacting, a character that all ministries, different ministries have to come together. There has to be extensive coordination between them. So I think I would suggest that why not have a kind of a post in the foreign ministry itself for coordination and policy planning for insofar as women issues are concerned. And then whatever comes, you have an officer, possibly a women, officer, senior officer of the rank of at least a joint secretary, to look after this division, create a division for coordination on women's issues. And I would also make another suggestion. We used to have a diaspora ministry. And when Mrs. Sushma Swaraj was the foreign minister, she was also, acting as the, minister for diaspora affairs, what we call the MOIA. which was actually the link between the Indian diaspora abroad and India. Now that link is disappeared. There is no diaspora ministry anymore. I used to serve in that ministry for 3 years, so I know the importance of that ministry to bring in the overseas diaspora into India, sensitize them into India's issues, and let them be your interlocutors, in a large way to promote your ideas and interests in projecting your foreign policies wherever they are living. Now we don't have that link. And I wish that link was established somewhere. I wish there was a lady officer to be working actively in promoting such links between India and the diaspora, because that is a very, very important link. And we need to suppose we have to engage our citizenry in gender sensitization program, we also have to bring out that into the outside domain, and how we are doing that. And the diaspora will help us immensely in this. So I think these are the few challenges which we have to overcome, and but it'll take a long time. I applaud the efforts of the CSR in this direction, and the way they have brought out. I think it calls for a paradigm change in our entire, not only in the government set up, but also in our forming our attitudes and forming our mindsets within the ministry, outside the ministry, bringing out always gender sensitive issues to the fore and discussing them, debating them, bringing in more women into our services, like Ambassador Trigunath mentioned about this lady officer who's now an air attaché. Bring out more such officers and let them be exemplars of women representatives abroad, of what they are doing at home. Let them go out. Let them be given the scope to go out. That could be a great deal of public diplomacy, if I can say so. So I think these are the few words I would say here. Maybe I'll wait for some other question if it is coming later on, and I'll allow other Ambassador Trigunath to speak a few words maybe on this subject.
Yes, sir. Sir, please unmute yours.
Well, on this particular subject, nothing much to be said, because Ambassador Malaya Mishra has very eloquently mentioned most of the constraints that happen, and that are really containing the offtake of women empowerment within the foreign service as well. Apart from the way the induction is done in the service, to the going to the conclusion, I would say, till ambassadorship or others, the kind of problems that are faced, those are there very much. They are structural issues. But let's say the mindset is the most important thing. The attitudinal change is the most important thing. And that comes from the top leadership of the country. And it has to come from there. And then it has to go down to the, today in the panchayat level, we have a large number of women who are working their panchayat. They are chairing panchayats, and they are doing a superb job. And today in the COVID times that we are seeing that it is the women power which is really involved everywhere. I mean, top leaders, whether it's a New Zealand leader, Finland, or any other country, these are all young women who are heading their countries, and they have done amazingly well globally. So there is no question that they are not. Even we had the women who have done amazingly well all over the world. So we have to remove the structural and institutional deficit that exists, and that really, constrains their growth within the system. So that's all I can say. And of course, the other things we have already mentioned.
Though we have time constraint, we have just one more question away. What are the possible areas of gender inclusion looking at the pandemic situation, to all our panelists?
Maybe others can say something.
Yes, I think let Nandita answer that question. She underlines some of the issues in terms of UN and UN related agencies, and then also how we can do in development cooperation. I think she very clearly indicated. Nandita, can you come in here, and then we can go to Smita for
sure. I think very quickly, Mansi, I think in the pandemic right now that we are facing, like I said, equitable access to all the health infrastructure and support is going to be essential. Access to vaccination has to be targeted. You can't expect that women will automatically get vaccinated, as it is. The numbers are showing that the number of women who are being vaccinated are much lesser than the men. And I think ensuring that, and it's not as of the vaccine, there has been an inherent inequity in accessing medical care and support by men and women differently, both in country and globally. So I think, how do we push that agenda in the pandemic, in just responding to the pandemic, of having that equitable access? Issues of lactating mothers or pregnant women. How do we address their needs in relation to vaccine? We have come in a little, it's taken the world some time to say, is the vaccine safe, for example, for pregnant women or not? And today we know it is. And so how are we going to push it and make sure that those kind of biases don't creep in while we access the much needed and the only currently solution at the moment, which is the vaccine for everybody equitably. Also, I think general health infrastructure needs to be ramped up to look at basic health needs for women, and those are going to be important, including nutrition. We do know that we live in a country where overall nutrition indicators for women are much lower, anemia is higher, and those are morbidities which are going to make the pandemic much harder for women to deal with. Currently, of course, the statistics of both infection and survival for men and women are almost similar. They're not really very different. But I think many of these things need to be addressed, and therefore development sector assistance, government programming, government outreach to households have to keep in mind number of people. My other concern today is loss of livelihood. You know, if the main earning member has been male and he's not survived the pandemic, how is the woman as a single-headed woman going to take care of the family? How are we going to target resources to that? How is the stimulus packages engendered? You know, I was actually reviewing the stimulus package of every country, and unfortunately, very few countries actually had a strong gender lens to say, in this stimulus package, for every new industry which comes up, which has 50% women, we are going to give you a tax rebate or a concession in other ways. Just as an example, there could be many more. That stimulus packages are going to specifically target women entrepreneurs who have lost business in a priority, not just for India, I'm talking globally. So engendering your stimulus packages as a recovery during this pandemic is going to be key economically. So these are some issues. So I'm going to stop here. And I think I'm going to say, pass over to Ranjana. And I think, Ranjana, you mentioned that Smita is here, probably would like to say a few words.
Yes,
yes.
I think, yes, Mansi, I think Jonathan Kum is also here from Swedish Embassy. If Jonathan, do you have anything to say at this stage? Something that you heard the whole discussion very patiently? Would you like to make some intervention here? Jonathan, can you hear me?
Please unmute yourself.
Please unmute yourself. Niharika, please allow Jonathan to unmute.
Can you hear me now? Hello, everyone.
Yes.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you. It's great to be included here tonight, and I'm very glad, and we are very glad that you take such an interest in this topic. Thank you, Dr. Kumari, again for hosting this. It's a great panel that you have. Sorry, can you hear me still? Yeah. It's a distinguished panel and very interesting insights. Like you rightly said, we were the first country in the world to launch a feminist foreign policy. It was the concept was developed and launched by our former foreign minister, Margot Wallström, in 2014. And actually, it was initially met with kind of a mixed reactions. Actually, a lot of criticism, as some of you know. I mean, the concept of feminism is quite controversial, also in our context. But people rather discuss gender equality and so on. But that was in the initial phase. But now, however, this policy is mostly met with appreciation. So it says something about how this can actually develop and how you can inspire with a new line of thinking in this field also. And I can just also add, I mean, you have actually explained it quite well, what it kind of consists of and how we integrate different sectors and so on. I'd also like to mention that for us, it's kind of it's an integral perspective and not an add-on, which it has a tendency of being described as sometimes. It brings policy areas together, which improves kind of the integration and the coordination and the impact. So it involves the whole system of our foreign policy. And this matter has become especially clear in peace processes where women are often excluded or non-active. Although that research has indicated that there is a clear correlation between women's participation and sustainable peace. So we are working on different fields, and our former foreign minister Marcus Wallström used to actually quote Mahatma Gandhi saying that first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, and then they fight you, and then you win. So that's actually speaking of the India connection to that too. But I'm just very glad to see this conversation take place. I think you have so many interesting insights, and I'm happy to keep following how this kind of discussion and this theme develops in India, because this context is very, very interesting to work in. So thanks a lot for taking the time, and I'll be happy to keep listening into this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Once you can invite Smita to make some comments on foreign affairs.
I invite Smita to throw light on her observations.
I must begin with congratulating Center for Social Research and Dr. Ranjana for organizing a webinar on a very relevant and timely theme. So we all are very aware about the need and imperative of having a gender representation of women at all levels of decision making. And this is not something which is a normative position to take. Studies have amply shown that this leads to better and inclusive outcomes. Despite that thing, we really see that at both the organizational level and at the level of decision making, women are underrepresented. So numbers do speak for themselves. Dr. Ranjana has thrown some factual numbers and statistics. I'll just add to it that within MEA, only 16.29% officers are women. And there are only 22 women officers holding the position of ambassadors or high commissioners in various missions and posts. Then again, we see there are just 14% women parliamentarians. And there's a study by Georgetown Institute for WPS, which shows that India ranks 133 out of 167 countries in WPS indicators. So there is a long path for India to tread. And I think the first problem and challenge which we really need to overcome is recognizing the fact that foreign policy is not gender neutral. There is gender discrimination, which is very much embedded. And Ambassador Malaya Mishra talked extensively about the barriers, systemic, institutional, and attitudinal barriers which restrict women's participation in decision-making processes. I would specifically mention two global developments that requires our attention and which can enhance meaningful participation of women. The first is feminist foreign policy, which Dr. Ranjana Kumari, Dr. Ambassador Malaya, Ambassador Anil, and Ms. Nandita have spoken extensively, and they have talked in details that it originated in 2014 in Sweden. And I really agree with Ambassador Malaya Mishra that we really need to look at Mexico, a country which is one of the global South countries and has adopted feminist foreign policy and which faces similar gender problems internally. So we can definitely emulate the experience of Mexico and try to incorporate some of the major planks of foreign FFPs, which is generally referred to. And the second one, which I would like to draw attention of the illustrious panel and the participants, is the WPS agenda, the Women, Peace and Security agenda, which was unanimously adopted by the Security Council in 2000. Did somebody say something? All right. So it's completed 20 years last year. So I think this is a very, very perfect time for India to come forward, particularly when it has claimed a position of a non-permanent member and want to be elevated to a permanent membership position. India has also been elected as a member of the Commission for Status of Women. And so I think it is a very timely position for India to come forward and have a strategy, a plan, a program, something, if not exactly the FFP, some sort of a actionable targets goal wherein we can include more women participation at both the organizational level and the representational level. Maybe one of the starting points I think we can begin with is with the three major starting points of feminist foreign policy, which is rights, representation, and resources. So rights in the form of, we recognize that women are neither weak nor strong, they're just equal. And that's what they have been vouching for and advocating for, including in the realm of foreign policy and security policy. Representation, I completely agree. We require the Women Reservation Bill to be tabled and passed. It's a very good thing that we have 11 women ministers in the Union Council at this point of time, including Meenakshi Lekhi, who is the MOS for NEA. So I think this is the right time to table the Women Representation Bill to enhance women representation and give voices to them, which will replicate in the foreign policy field as well. So I will end with a short question to our illustrious panelists. Is what do you think? How do we go about it? It's accepted that yes, gender representation is needed. Inclusive foreign policy is what we need. But how do we go about it? Do we need to take a graduated step? Do we start with a feminist foreign policy? Do we go with having a national action plan like 80 other countries on WPS? So this is something I would end with. And thank you for having me here with such an illustrious panel and a very pertinent theme. Thank you.
So any of our panelists would answer that, or we are over time? So
I think it's already 1 hour, 20 minutes. Shall we postpone it? Leave it for the next one. Anybody wants to intervene here and just say something quickly out of the panelists? Anil, Malay, anybody? Or Nandita?
I would only say, once again, reiterate that, the intake for women into the foreign service, that is a long-term prospect for which several changes would be required. But those who are there already must be given the right kind of jobs to perform. I mean, that can be done within the system. There is nothing prevents you from doing that. Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, and as Nandita also mentioned, that today we have a development partnership policy with the countries. We can immediately start making an impact if we say that every project that we are going to finance or we are going to training programs, we would have at least 40 to 50% representation for the women. You know, the Solar Mamas, that project that has created a really a song and dance in it's a renewable energy sector within Africa. Everybody understands who Solar Mamas are. So once you do that, you empower a very large cross section, and that's where they recall that yes, India is standing with us. So I think that immediately this can be done, but National Action Plan, of course, has to be there, because you can only represent if something is representable. So if we don't put our own house in order, it'll be extremely difficult to go outside and talk about it. Thank you.
Well, if I'm allowed just 2 minutes to conclude this debate, I think the efforts of CSR to move this debate forward are laudable. I think you should bring this debate into the mainstream of India's public discourse.
Yes.
It should be debated in various forums, not only as a webinar, but maybe through conferences, through papers. Engage the policymakers at every level, and let them be more and more sensitized that a lot will come through them. I mean, they will deliver. The biggest problem in India today is, proper governance systems. Our governance systems are somehow creaking. They are not, catering to the expectations of the citizenry. And we have to make the proper matching between governance and citizenry, the expectations of the citizens of India. Well, just now we had a visiting dignitary from USA who said that Indian democracy is powered by its thinking citizens. Nothing could be better said than that. But secondly, I would say, talking about Ms. Smita's proposal about action plans, we have had an action plan on this WPS UNSCR 1325 resolution, which we had been a party. We are committed to that, to prepare an action plan, a national action plan. For the last 20 years, India has not moved one step on that. So, it is quite okay to say all that, but how do we implement it? That is the main question. And to implement it, I think we have to start from a bottom-up approach. We have to start from the grassroots level. And I know Ranjana very well. She is an excellent grassroots worker. Go up to the grassroots and get this advocacy and awareness building among the women and sensitize them, which will reach the highest echelons of the government. And there should be a constant interaction between what is happening at the bottom, at the grassroots, and what should happen at the top, which should reflect what is happening in the bottom. I think that is what which will lead the debate forward, which will give muscle to this debate further.
Thank you. Thank you, Malay. I request now Dr. Mansi Mishra to conclude it. I think Niharika is going to give the vote of thanks.
Yes,
And
ma'am,
follow it up. Lot of questions, I must tell you, in the chat box. Lots of questions, but I don't think we have time to answer them. We have gone well beyond our time. So
we are extremely sorry, but this is quite engaging discussion, so I didn't want to cut it short. So thank you, our distinguished panelists, for making it so interesting, so informative. Also for all of us, diplomacy is a completely new cup of tea for all of us, but we have been educated, and through this informative session, we could more graduated into the discussion. And I really look forward to a paper and a conference, roundtable conference taking place on this issue. I thank all our distinguished panelists, our director, Dr. Ranjana Kumari, without whose interest and without whose school we couldn't have pushed and we couldn't have done this. And definitely I thank all my CSR colleagues, our participants, valuable participants who have sat through the discussion. We'll take up your questions and post it to our panelists for the definite answers. And last but not the least, my team who has always supported me and stood as a pillar in making everything realized. Thank you. Thank you so much, Niharika, Subha, Bhalli, Jyoti, Ritika, whomsoever there is in our meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ranjana Kumari. Thank you, Ambassador Anil Trigonayat. We will meet again in some of the other forums.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you all participants, and we hope to connect. Ranjana, I hope we can connect each other again. And whatever interesting programs come, please let us know. And we can contribute in some way.
Certainly. Thank you, Nandita. Thank you, Smita.
Thank you, Ranjana. Thank you so much. Lovely meeting you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nandita ji.
Thank you, Malaya.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ambassador. Bye-bye.